Вітаю, друзі! Брифінг присвячений...
Greetings, friends. The briefing is devoted to the exposure of fakes and the information war waged by the aggressor state against Ukraine. Let's start with the fact that over the last few days, Russia has been conducting a massive information and psychological special operation in order to accuse Ukraine of allegedly intending to use the so-called dirty bomb. This scenario unfolds according to all the laws of the genre. At first, unnamed so-called anonymous sources of the Russian state agency RIA Novosti reported that Ukraine seems to have such an intention. After that, this message began to be replicated by bloggers who appear on Russian propaganda sites with a similar information message. For example, on the Russia Today channel, the so-called expert of the Center for Military and Political Journalism, Boris Rozhin, stated that it seems that Ukraine is going to create a so-called dirty bomb to simulate a Russian nuclear strike on Ukraine with the aim of accusing Russia. Then, Defense Minister Shoigu gets more involved, calling the defense ministers of Britain, France, the United States and Turkey with a similar message, but without direct language, only mentioning this alleged intention of the Ukrainian side. Well, then there is information from the first person, the Speaker of the State Duma, Volodin, who claims the same fake news about the alleged preparation of this very dirty bomb by Ukraine. The Kiev regime instructed nuclear scientists to create a dirty bomb, continues to shell the critical infrastructure of nuclear power plants, provoking a humanitarian catastrophe, the Speaker of the Russian parliament claims, an official person in Russia. After that, according to logic, similar messages should be spread by the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the President of Russia himself, in order for the informational psychological special operation to be framed in a full circle of this information fake. Ukraine did not plan, did not create and will not create any dirty bombs, but it is being done with a single purpose, a typical preparation for a false flag operation, as Russia constantly does when it accuses those against whom itself creates these criminal intentions. Therefore, Ukraine's position remains unchanged. The West must take these statements very seriously and prevent any use of weapons of mass destruction against Ukraine. Meanwhile, in Russia itself, the real face of the main propagandists is shown. They show the nature of this war that Russia is waging against Ukraine. This is genocide. In particular, their official journalist and blogger Anton Krasovsky speaks on the official state channel, declaring to the whole world that it turns out that Ukrainian children should simply be killed. He said this while commenting on the statement that Ukrainians consider the territory captured by Russia to be occupied. What did the official Russian state blogger say about this? "We had to drown such people," he said that. "The Muscovites have occupied us, and you immediately throw them into the river." This is a quote. Another quote: "We should lock these children in a spruce house and then burn them." This is a direct speech, I repeat, of an official state Russian propagandist who speaks with such a presentation on official state Russian channels. This confirms that Russia is waging genocide against Ukraine, and this requires the harshest reaction from the civilized world. In addition to Krasovsky, Russian state propaganda continues to use discredited speakers who spread completely propagandistic narratives. Once again, the so-called supposedly American former intelligence officer Scott Ritter appeared on the air of Russian state propaganda television, promoting the information that Russia needs. Let me just remind you that this alleged former intelligence officer was previously convicted on the territory of the USA of crimes of a sexual nature and even served a sentence. There is nothing surprising in it, because none of the adequate people agreed to speak on the side of Russia. Next, Russia continues the information war, claiming that Ukraine uses foreign mercenaries to supposedly liberate the occupied territories, while Russia itself uses mercenaries from among its prisoners, to whom it frankly claims. For them, it is a one-way ticket. All they go to the war and die or remain in prison. So, state propagandists claim that about 200 foreign mercenaries, American and British Marines, have been trained by NATO curators for the liberation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. This is a lie designed to serve one purpose: to justify Russia's military defeats on the battlefield and to repeat the narrative that Russia is fighting on the territory of Ukraine, not with Ukraine but with NATO countries. At the same time, there is an anecdote on this topic, that NATO has not yet even entered the war. Of course, there are no mercenaries from NATO countries on the territory of Ukraine, and this information is another information dump. The use of the argument in favor of the mobilization to the Russian army by Russian propagandists also draws attention. In addition to convicts, people who do not pay alimony are also offered to be taken there. This confirms what we already knew. For Russians, serving in the army and fighting against Ukraine is by no means an honorable mission, but a punishment. In particular, particular, a certain producer, Joseph Prigozhin, quotes himself on the broadcast of the Strana 5 channel. If a person is not ready to take responsibility for children, then let him pay his debt to the state. He supported the idea of sending alimony workers to the front. And finally, the traditional confirmation that Russian propaganda is trying to shift the responsibility for future energy supply problems in Europe onto the Europeans themselves and their governments. Thus, Russian propaganda began to publish invitations to so-called Russian cultural centers on the territory of European countries in order to, quote, warm up there, because the temperature in the homes of Europeans will be lower than expected due to the energy crisis provoked by Russia itself. A typical tactic. The rapist invites the victim to visit him. There can be only one answer. Russian cultural centers are not about culture, but about espionage, in particular as the FBI once established, which accused the head of the Russian cultural center in Washington of espionage. The traditional appeal is not to fall for these informational provocations, not to trust Russian propagandists, but to trust exclusively Ukrainian mass media, Ukrainian teleson, Ukrainian local authorities, political and military leadership. See you.